Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Rokai's Raid Guides, where today we are talking about Protectors of the Endless, but this time on Elite mode. So this is the version of the boss that is intended to be significantly more difficult than the other way to do the boss, but rewards you with higher item level loot, so you'll get 516 loot off this boss, and then it's also a part of the Warcraft logs requirement for guild rankings, right? So a couple of different things here that are going to change, but before we jump into the changes and some of the overlapping mechanics, let's talk about raid composition. So for this fight, in 10-man, you're going to want to run 2 tanks, 3 healers, and then any mixture of DPS. But I will say, just like many other fights here, having more ranged DPS is good. However, because of the amount of interrupts needed, you're also going to want a healthy balance of melee to help with those, as they tend to have the shorter cooldown on their interrupts. So try to find a healthy balance. Like 3 and 3 is totally fine, but you're going to want a couple of melee. You can't go all range for this fight. So, kicking over to the mechanic that persists in any version of this heroic boss that you'll be doing is the Minion of Fear. So, it's the ad that spawns every so often, fixates on the lowest health boss, and that will need to be killed. And again, the 2 nearest players to that ad when it dies will gain 1 stack of effectively a damage buff. And then, after they reach 9 stacks, if you get to a 10th stack, you will blow up and wipe the entire raid. Similarly, if 5 of the minions are not killed and they make it all the way onto a boss, on the 5th stack of that happening, it will wipe the entire raid. However, the first 4 leading up to that do increase the damage that the bosses do, so you very much so do not want to let these through. It will either cause a wipe or make life a lot more difficult for your healers, who are already going to be very stressed during this fight. Now, the other things that persist are all the primary mechanics that each of these first bosses do. So the water bolt from Asani, the lightning bolt from Regale, the dot that exists from Cloon, all of those things are going to be here throughout the entire duration of the fight, with a few key differences on the added abilities after you kill one of the first bosses. Speaking of killing bosses, the boss kill order for the elite version of this fight is going to be Regale, or the lightning boss, first, Asani, or the water boss, second, and then this final one, Cloon, or the Sha infused corruption boss, last. So it'll be Regale, Asani, Cloon. Each time one of the bosses dies, the remaining bosses left in the encounter will gain a new ability or an empowered ability, and that's where the fight begins to look a little bit different. When all 3 are alive, the fight is identical to any other version that you would be doing, but as each one dies, this is where it becomes slightly more complex. So, before we go any further into the empowered abilities or new mechanics that exist within the elite version of this fight, I want to recover the basics that we talked about in the other guide very briefly. So, cutting back in the footage here really quick. Elder Asani's Water Bolt is still going to need to be interrupted. Every single cast, it reduces the damage you take tremendously. You'll need 3 people assigned to this in a rotation of 3, and I recommend just doing some type of focus interrupt macro and then kicking every single Water Bolt that gets cast, and this will happen for the entire duration that Asani is alive. She's also the second boss that you kill, so for basically the first 3 or 4 minutes, you will need a 3-person rotation of interrupts. One thing to note on this that's very important, since you're obviously going to be using melee as your primary interrupt source, when it is that melee's turn to go out and kill this minion of fear you can see on the screen now, clearly they won't be able to get the interrupt. You're going to want somebody to be assigned as a backup and just communicate when that person is out. So for example, our third team that gets the basically ad number 9, 10, and 11, that warrior will not be able to get his interrupt, and he's assigned to interrupt number 1. So for about, I don't know, 20 seconds or so, we had our Resto Shaman be a backup interrupt on kick number 1 for Asani. So something important to playing around, have a backup assigned for when one of your melee is out killing the minions, as they won't be able to get that interrupt. Mechanic number 2 that persists, lightning bolts. If you watch the other guide, you know for the most part this can be completely ignored. It is only cast on the tank. It's a pretty moderate amount of damage. If you have an extra interrupt, you can kick it, but it can also be completely ignored. Final two pieces of the puzzle that persist regardless of the order you kill this boss in. Lightning Prisons. It is a debuff applied to two random targets that, after a short duration, when it expires, will stun them and anybody around them. Make sure these players run out and are dispelled by the healers. And then the very last one is Cleansing Waters. This is a purge or spell stealable buff that can be applied to any boss inside its little hitbox that will heal the boss. So you can ignore this completely if it is on any of the bosses you're not targeting. But if it goes on to one of the bosses you are trying to kill, you need this to be mass dispelled off, purged, trank shotted. Just make sure you remove Cleansing Waters so it does not heal the boss. Okay, so you've killed the first boss. Now this is where the fight begins to look a little bit different. Each time a boss dies, as you guys know, the new bosses remaining gain an empowered effect. So the one primarily here that we're going to focus on is Defiled Ground, which is the ability Cloon grabs. This is primarily a tank mechanic where he is going to drop a small puddle every 15 seconds underneath the boss's location. Now, the second thing that goes along with this is obviously if you're standing in this puddle, you're going to be taking damage. So you just want to be kiting the boss around using your off tank every 15 seconds, just moving him out of that puddle and tanking him. Second to this is that each time a puddle is dropped, that tank will gain a stacking debuff that increases the amount of damage that they are taking from those puddles. So in addition to having to kite the boss around the room a little bit, you also will add a tank swap mechanic into this. Now, what I would recommend is somewhere between like 6 to 9 stacks of this damage amp is where you're going to want to swap your tanks. An easier way to think about it, depending on what your damage looks like, is when Asani gets anywhere between 30 to 50% HP. You can see the swap happening right here. You just swap who is, let's say, walking the dog, right? If you will, tanking Cloon over there to the side. You're going to swap. That way the damage amp doesn't get too high on that off tank, and you continue through the fight like normal. Everything else here are mechanics that you would have seen in the standard version or the easy mode of this heroic fight, which is continue to get interrupts on Asani, cleanse the boss of the Cleansing Waters or the heal, and then killing Corrupting Waters that spawns as quickly as possible. On Corrupted Waters, when this spawns, it does do a lot of damage. You want to kill it quickly. But secondly, anybody within 15 yards of the Corrupting Waters when it dies does gain a buff that you're going to want. It's going to help with damage and healing. And then 15 yards for reference is just like that golden circle in the center. If you're inside that, you will get the buff when Corrupted Waters dies. So you can see we transition into P3 here, but before I go in depth into what the third phase looks like, I want to talk about the first two phases and how to actually handle them from a strategy perspective. So starting with the most difficult one, the Minions of Fear, or the ad that's always fixated on the lowest health boss. The way you handle this is having teams of 2. So you're going to have 5 teams of 2, and you're going to rotate who is getting the buff and when. The formula for this is somewhat simple. It is always prioritize your best DPS first, followed by any healer that might gain something by getting a damage buff. Think Mistweaver for Eminence healing or Disc Priest for Atonement healing. So in this case, we're doing our 2 ranged players first. It's going to be myself and the Warlock. We're going to kill the first 3 minions and make sure we're nearest to it when it dies so that we get 3 stacks of the damage buff. After that, team number 2 is going to get 3 stacks of the damage buff. After that, team 3 gets 3 stacks of the damage buff. And then we start back over. So then we will move back to team 1. So Mage Warlock get 3 stacks / kill 3 ads. Then it's going to be the Hunter and the DK get 3 stacks. And then our Disc Priest and Warrior get 3 stacks. After that, we go back to team 1. The reason for this is by the time you get there, your buff will be very close to falling off, which you don't want to happen. You need that extra damage. So we are then looking to refresh our buff and do the exact same thing. So we'll get 3 stacks of the damage amp, rotate through those first 3 teams, and then we'll get 3 more. And again, I'll put an annotation on screen of what that actually looks like. But the goal will be to get 9 stacks effectively on the main DPS players as early as possible without losing the damage amp at any point throughout the fight. And so the way you manage that is by just balancing the uptime on it and then occasionally tossing in your healers and tanks to start soaking when you would be at 9 for the majority of the raid. So I'll put that on screen now so that you guys can see it. Organize this effectively and you'll be okay. Second part of strategy for this is ensuring you always have slows on these minions. They do move very quickly. Having a hunter trap down at all times is very useful. I, as an arcane mage, ran the glyph of slow so that anytime I arcane blasted, it would slow it. But any type of range slow, chains of ice, whatever it might be for your group, make sure you have a slow on these minions or they will go way too fast and you likely won't be able to kill them. And the final tip on this is if you have a set where you've got melee out there killing this, reminder on the backup interrupt for Asani. And secondly, you're still going to want your ranged players helping kill them. You just don't want them to be the closest player when the ad dies. All right, second piece of strategy for this fight. It is very meaningless early on in the fight, but is the most important mechanic as you get towards the end, and that is Touch of Sha. So the entire time that Cloon, the final boss that you kill, is alive, every 30 seconds he's going to put a debuff on a random player called Touch of Sha. All this is a dot that is not dispellable and will not go away until the fight ends. That's what makes this elite version of the boss so difficult, since that is the last boss you kill. For the entirety of the fight, you will have players taking dot damage. I'll highlight it on the raid frames right now. You can actually see who's currently taking that. By the time you get to the later stage of this fight, every single player in your raid will have this on them. So your entire raid is taking ticking dot damage, and your healers are going to be very low on mana and need tons of throughput in order to keep us alive. So the strategy here is early on in the fight, when the damage is relatively low, you're going to want to do two things. The first is have your healers conserve as much mana as possible. That should be obvious, but in general, use the least amount of mana possible while there's a low amount of damage happening. Second is, even though there's no large blasts of damage in this fight, you're going to want to be using raid CDs very frequently to just reduce the amount of healing that needs to be done throughout the fight in an effort to help reduce the amount of mana being used by your healers. So things like rally or demo ban or personal cooldowns, off-spec healing, anything like that to reduce damage taken through the first two bosses to help conserve healer mana is really, really useful. With strategy out of the way, let's jump back into P3, talk about the mechanics that have been added, and then how to handle them. So for P3, there's only one new mechanic that you have not seen yet. It is Expel Corruption, happens every 40 seconds. It is an area denial effect that also does a very large amount of damage to anybody standing within this Sha-infused circle you see by the orange marker right now. So this will not affect range players as long as you're far enough away from the boss. It will only impact people in melee. So two things. One, on this Expel Corruption timer, you're going to want your melee to start to pre-move a little bit to reduce the amount of damage that they take. Secondly, you'll want a raid CD for every single Expel Corruption, or a large personal if you're in melee. And lastly, any type of movement speed to help get the boss / yourself out of that circle as fast as possible is going to be needed. This is the dangerous part of the fight, especially with that ticking dot that has persisted the entire time. When this pulse of damage goes out from Expel Corruption, it's the most scared you'll be. So big personal cooldowns and a raid cooldown for every single Expel Corruption. Here's where things start to get tricky. That's the only new mechanic of the fight, but you have all 10 players in your raid with a dot on them, ticking for a large amount of damage. You have your melee who are going to be occasionally being hit by this Expel Corruption that is also an area denial, causing huge amounts of damage again. And then finally, the mechanic that's existed the entire time just continues to get more difficult. So this Minion of Fear still has to be killed before it reaches the boss. But now you can see myself and many of the other players already have 9 stacks of the buff, meaning that if we are closest to the ad when it dies, we instantly wipe the entire raid. So managing this specific part, the Minion of Fear, during the last phase of this boss becomes really hard and also really important. You can see I'm swapping here, trying to keep slows on it, dealing damage to it, while ensuring I'm still not the closest person on the ad when it dies. Also, the added layer of difficulty here is when you're this deep into the fight, odds are the only people that have the ability to even soak these ads are going to be your tanks and your healers. For obvious reasons, it's going to be difficult for your tank to be out here doing it, so try to use your healers and use range to kill the minions as they get close to the boss, and have the healers stack on top of the ad as it dies. Final piece that I forgot to mention early on into P3, but as soon as you transition into P3, I recommend using Lust. You can save it for a little bit later into the fight when you have all of your DPS with 9 stacks of the damage amp, but I also don't see as much value in holding that since your cooldowns will likely line up with P3. So my recommendation is as soon as you jump into P3, send Bloodlust and all your cooldowns and try to get yourself out of this phase as quickly as possible. And that covers everything you need to know about the elite version of this boss. DPS players, properly manage the Minions of Fear and your stacks. Healers, save your mana for that third phase. There is a ton of taking damage going out. You'll need every bit of throughput you can get for that final phase. So, little TLDR of the entire fight as quickly as I can. Phase 1, it looks the same for any version of this boss that you're doing. Get interrupts on Water Bolt using rotation of 3. You can ignore Lightning Bolt. Dispel the 2 lightning prisons that go out with your healers, and then manage the stacks of the Minion of Fear, prioritizing your best damage dealers first and likely using your ranged players to get those first stacks. Lastly, dispelling the cleansing waters off of your kill target so that it doesn't heal, and then moving into P2, have your off tank pull Cloon out to the side, kiting him around, dropping those small Sha puddles. Continue to get water bolts, interrupts, as well as killing the new corrupted waters that spawns. Try to have as many people as close to that as possible when it dies. And don't forget, there is a tank swap that happens here. It is going to be around that 8 stack mark on the Cloon tank that you'll want to do a taunt swap. For us, that meant boss HP was right around 40-ish%. But again, just watch your tank's health. When it starts taking too much damage, do a swap. If you want to be extra safe, you can do this around 4 or 5 stacks. We just did it at 8 because it meant there was only one taunt swap that we had to do. P3, move the boss to the outer corner, watch the expel corruption zone timers and move them out of there quickly. Have a raid CD ready each time this goes out. Healers, have as many throughput cooldowns and as much mana going into this phase as possible. Bloodlust as soon as you transition in. Pay attention specifically to the end of this phase. Make sure your healers are the one grabbing the Minion of Fear damage amp so that nobody reaches 10. And then just pray to whatever gods that you believe in that your healers have enough healing to keep these people with the dots alive. Manage all that effectively, the boss will fall over. My personal opinion is that the elite version of this boss is not too much harder of the standard version or the easier version of heroic. So if you've already killed this boss doing easy mode, give hard mode a shot. It's not too much more difficult. You just have a little bit more raid healing to do at the end of the fight with this added bit of movement as well. Covers everything for the elite version of Protectors of the Endless. If you've gotten this far, you can now enjoy your 516 loot, your Phase Bis loot, and get yourself prepped and ready for Throne of Thunder. Speaking of which, myself and the guild plan on doing PTR every single weekend when that's available, though we don't have a date yet. If you're interested in watching us test bosses live, follow us on Twitch. I'll leave everybody's links in the description below. We'll be doing those live. I'm also always streaming our Reclears as well as GDKPs. Stop by, ask questions. And speaking of asking questions, don't forget, I try to be great about leaving responses to every single comment in the section down below. So if I mess something up, if you have feedback for me or just a general question, leave them in the comments below. I'll try to get back to every single one as I look to improve week after week and bring you guys the best possible guides I can for the 10-man community. Thanks a ton for the support so far this tier. It's been an absolute blast, and good luck as you guys progress through TOS.